Greetings from the Hostage Diaries. Today I'm going to recollect about Mardi Gras and some of the other derivative lifestyle catacombs that I crawled through while being Well, the problem was, like I've said so many times before, I was shrunk down. So they didn't need me anymore. So then it was just go out in the yard and play because we already stole your wallet while we enhance. Well, time solidifies the transference of energy from body. See, there's all sorts of angles of exploitation, seemingly, because Louis in Louisiana, natural resources derivative. But my body is wholly owned where I cannot even use any of it. It just doesn't make a lot of sense because of the derived energy from and the chemical processes that are created. No, it's not a very. If I had control of any sort, which obviously I do not, then I would have stipulated competently. That's been the problem, incompetence, because handicap. There's motive for the shrink and handicap is to make it easier. That's what this is all about. We want to make it easier by making it harder on me. It's easier to pick my pocket and utilize the credit card for therefore many different purposes. So it's hard to get off of the ground. And like I said, I've gone through the charts of what I was making. When you're making between 5 and 10,000 a year, you're barely alive. I mean, you can't even function. It really was. It's a very rare occurrence when I spent over like $20 on a meal ever in my life. I know. Well, the joke is, it's the Epicurean. The mob enjoys discrediting or desecrating the source of the power by desecrating any of the principles of therefore that are derived, that where the power is derived from. So my Epicurean, my Vintner's Kool-Aid, if I was lucky, the Gatorade, yeah. Or the living on franchise fast food rather than foie gras, but I was foie gras for some. They force-fed me. That's one of the games, is force-feeding me to other people in order to be comrades in guilty arms. That happens a lot. Force feeding me because I'm literally, when you're on as short a leash as I am, as small as I'm shrunk down to concentrated energy, then it makes it real easy to slide it in. And that's why I'm hidden in plain sight. Kind of like those kids did with E.T. That's kind of how I was the entire time with Drew Barrymore and all the boys. But I was just hidden. And I didn't even know who I was most of the time. And obviously I recollect back, and it seems like other people at least had a clue, obviously, to a degree of what was going on. But it's really smart as far as they use force fields and tractor beams, which are that's part of the necessity of the really short leash. And my family obviously doesn't have much of a clue. All they're doing is paddling. They aren't smart enough to figure it out that they are being manipulated. See, the mob, another way the mob works is to implicate the family against each other. Therefore, that gives them a leverage block. And as far as they pit us, it's the Louis Marx Toys Rock'em Sock'em Robots mentality because they're using the Stretch Armstrong, stretching the elasticity of manipulation of interpretation. So therefore, then they pit us against each other in order to, I mean, literally, while at first I was cockfighted against union kids from the plants. That kept me small, and not to mention it, the anytime I encountered it was they knew what they were doing. I shouldn't have been exposed because those are highly volatile chemicals. And of course, the pride factor of being, because of the amount of money that is generated through the jobs in the state, whereas the state, my support all they are is a bunch of fucking worthless laser pointers. Just shine lights on me anytime anything's going wrong so the mob can correct it or screw me worse. That's all that my supports. They're a bunch of worthless pointers, but for the most part, that's nothing, you know. So, factions of the mob relating to certain industries that their energy ties into or that they are deriving power to and from as a connectivity. They're wildcatters and roughnecks for the most part, plugging me full of holes. And therefore transferring my power through schematics. And that's why I've been shrunk down, concentrated in order to make it easier to contain. And therefore, it leads to my survival mechanism. Of course, what's the worst interpretation of Survivor Eye of the Tiger? Survival mechanism. Of course, being on that castaway Forrest Gump Island. So, therefore, it's me, just stuck in these horrific, just survival mechanisms of, well, I really honestly think this goes back to they wanted to keep me away from girls. I honestly think it goes back. I honestly think there has been a conscious effort to keep me away from girls my entire life. Because for some reason, it has to go back to the New Orleans Jazz moving to Utah and the Mormonism. And then when the Reister twins, who were from Buffalo, whose father worked for Exxon, moved next door, they just went total ape shit. And then, there's all sorts of things. So I was played in certain factions, or I don't know. It's just bizarre. To what it turned into. And that seems to be a major motive, though, is keep away the skirts. The pimps want to control the asset skirts. And therefore, because their skirts are marketable, they can trade or sell them on the open market, and they do. Like horses, thoroughbred horses. They trade. There's schools of skirts that are traded for favors to different factions. Believe me, it goes on. It might not be conscious effort, but the system itself corrects itself if there's it's self-correcting to a certain degree. But they lost control because of bigger fish. See, they kept they wanted to be in control, but they lost their muscle. So now you got some bigger fish, bigger sharks circling the pond, and they can't really protect themselves. So they're vulnerable. Now they're just, sit back, anybody wants to pick and choose. So that another way of burying is dirty it up, and so nobody will want it, or that's what's happening with me. They wanted to make me wait until nobody else will want me so they can Jew down and get the deal of the century or something after they this is all speculative psychology, criminal psychology of the deviant mind pertaining to my captivity. So my prime years in New Orleans, and this goes back to my recollection of Mardi Gras. I'd started off I lived in New Orleans once before and dated a girl, and then ended up moving back to Baton Rouge. Then I got a job in Glacier when 9/11 happened, 2001, because in Glacier, where I did really good, I was actually a manager of a lounge and a restaurant, and I had a lot of friends. I dated 2 or 3 girls. I was partying a lot with all the people. I had a great time, no problems at all. And then when I got back, of course, I paid for that. My pimps, they got to beat me back down because that's how they control it. That's how they keep control, so they got to beat me back down. So, of course, and when 9/11 happened, I took a trip out west. That's what I could. And I drove all along the West Coast, and I was consciously looking for jobs or places to live or anything. But I had like $5,000-6,000, and I was not spending much. I was going very cheap. I was every other night sleeping in the car on the road, that sort of thing, eating cheap and not spending any money. Ended up traversing all the way down to California, where I ended up meeting up with some friends of mine, and then I ended up going to Las Vegas, which I didn't. actually looking for jobs. I just had never been in any of these places. I stayed in cheap hotels, if anything. I never splurged just because. I mean, with $5,000 and with no plan of where to go, I went through Colorado, couldn't really find anything, and ended up going back to Baton Rouge just because after 9/11, the economy dropped so much that jobs were really scarce. So it wasn't like it's easy to find a job. So I ended up back in Baton Rouge, and people I had slept on the couch with before were moving to New Orleans. So we ended up about to get an apartment, but we moved down there, and that fell through. And they ended up moving somewhere else, and I ended up getting a one-bedroom. That's when the Hornets moved to town. So the Hornets moved to New Orleans, and on that day I got that job as a fry cook, and then I got kicked out of another place and ended up living on St. Charles, right across from McDonald's, right near, it was either Napoleon or Louisiana, on the corner of St. Charles, whatever, right across from the McDonald's, on a floor level studio apartment that really wasn't very nice at all, and I think it had basic cable, right next to Touro Hospital, and I was about a block away from the tropical infectious disease clinic, and I had terrible jobs, like I said, and I was 2 blocks away from Commander's Palace. I used to walk a lot. That's all I could do because I could occasionally, there was 1 or 2 nights a week, there was a bar close by that had dollar beer, and I would go there on Saturday nights and get drunk, but that was about only drinking I ever did. I went to coffee shops a lot. So I ended up getting fired from the fry cook place and ended up getting a job at the Britannia Theater, which was a semi kind of famous theater in New Orleans. It's old, in an old Garden District neighborhood, and at a candy store, working for a family the owner's husband was a professor at the Tulane Medical School. And so it was a temporary job though, and this was around Christmas on through like Valentine's, and this was only for a few months. And then I actually went to a party. The general manager. I know it sounds so pathetic, but that's Spuds McKenzie's life there. Um, it was really strange though because I don't understand it. I just doesn't make any sense to me, or it's just bizarro. So, I ended up losing the job at the movie theater for some odd reason. I don't know. It was strange. Ended up getting fired and then laid off from the candy store because the holiday season was over. So I couldn't get another job. And most of the time, all I ever did was spend time looking for jobs. That's all my ever life has been. Is looking through. That's where Craigslist and Daniel Craig comes into it. It's my entire life has been looking through one ad. And my aunt works for the Department of Labor of the state. I mean, these fucking pieces of Louisiana trash. I mean, come on. I mean, that shows you what respect we get, Rodney Dangerfield. I mean, it's just absolutely insane. My entire life, literally, Baton Rouge and New Orleans, 500 to 1,000 applications. I mean, I used to go anytime there was a job in the paper and it wasn't ever anything good because it was like I couldn't even get off the ground floor. So bad. I mean, it was so pathetic. So, it was getting to be Mardi Gras season, and I had no jobs and never got another job. And I was basically had enough for I had a few $100s, basically, no more than that ever. So I ended up getting evicted from my apartment on St. Charles because I lost both my job. Right about 2 weeks before Mardi Gras, or a week before Mardi Gras season. And so I get kicked out of my apartment, and I mean, what else am I going to do? I have no money. Nothing else I can do. Basically, because I had been poor for so long, I'm losing contact. And obviously, the motive was alienation. Poverty creates alienation. That's what they were trying to accomplish, the mob, obviously, because they wanted to keep me contained because they had stolen my identity. This was all an identity theft forgery scam from LSU, obviously. Not to mention the Jacob Valero oil. You know, so a lot of people were getting paid rich off of this scam, and I'm just the victim who hadn't really figured it out yet. I was still in my struggling artist phase, trying to, and I would go to when I could. I actually think I had a job for a few weeks managing a jazz club on Rampart Street. Ended up getting fired. I got fired a lot, all the time, just because people felt threatened by me because I was intelligent to a degree, because I could talk competently. I think that honestly was it. And so I don't know what it was. So so I ended up, I didn't have a real plan of anything. You know, it was kind of, obviously I'm supposed to have hung myself because of freedom of religion gives a lot of leeway here. We all know they were playing that card. The mob was playing that card hard. So I ended up deciding, I mean, I didn't have anything else to do. So I go to my aunt and uncle's and I borrowed a tent and some fishing gear and ended up finding a park in Mississippi about 20 miles from, 30 miles north of Biloxi. There's this big park. And so I ended up driving out there with all my possessions. Well, that's the thing. When I get evicted and I'm living in this one car, that I really can't. I mean, I'm just losing stuff constantly. Anytime I acquire, anytime I acquire anything, it's gone. So it's, you know, I keep nothing. You know, everything I get, it's just, I don't know. So I end up going out there. I pitch a tent. I hike way back up into the woods. I get a fishing pole, and I have a little bit of money, enough to like buy sandwich stuff and hot dogs, and I actually think I bought bought a bottle of whiskey just because of. And so I was out there for like a week, and I had to go back into town because I had another paycheck from the candy store in New Orleans for like $150 or $250 or something like that. So by pitch, and I remember I was fishing. I caught a few fish. I mean, and just basically hiking around. I would spend my days. They had a place that had really cheap tacos, of all places, in Mississippi, like 50-cent tacos. And so that for like $3, I could fill up once a day. I was eating very little, or going to the grocery store and just sleeping out in this tent for like 2 weeks while Mardi Gras was raging. Beau Rivage right down the street there, of course, that big old Beau Rivage. And so I'm sleeping out in a wildlife state park or something. So I end up going back to New Orleans, getting my paycheck, and cashing it. And it was Mardi Gras. Right around Mardi Gras was raging. And so I knew I didn't have any place to stay. And so I wandered around. I had a few, it just looked around. Did the people watch a thing? It was packed, crowded. That's my last remembrance of Mardi Gras that I can remember, because I think that was the last time I lived in New Orleans. Or maybe I drove. No, I think that is the last time I went to New Orleans. I know I went to New Orleans since then, but I didn't go to Mardi Gras. That was the last time I went. So it was. I can't remember if I'd even showered in like a week or so. So I'm walking around. I hadn't showered in like a week after being camping. Um, I used to I had a bar of soap and I'd go to the pond and wash off there. And the problem was I was beaten down so bad, and this was part of the mob wanted to alienate the family. They could only do so much for me. And I mean, I had already worn out my welcome there because I had been beaten down for so long. I guess because I had been poisoned. I don't know. Maybe it was that's method. I guess it's that poison, the genetic hacking. Not to mention, like I said, I had anybody else I seem to know never had problems. I always got the worst job. If I ever got a decent job, I got fired almost immediately. The only jobs I kept were the ones that I was making like $10 or $20 a day. Barely, I keep those. But anything where I might actually make a little bit of money, and I guarantee it goes back to the skirts. Because they're upset, these pimps were obsessed with this Orange Crush Chinese bandits keeping me away from the skirts. I honestly get this feeling that it always had to do. They wanted to sell. They were pimps that were selling these thoroughbreds and these skirts for assets, and I was a threat, I guess, or so. I don't know. Well, and obviously I'm supposed to be dead by now from killing myself, and that way because my family's really brainwashed. I can remember meeting with my dad, and he didn't have a clue. I mean, I remember we went to lunch one day, and I remember telling him, I said, aren't you some kind of king or something? And he looked at me and just walked away. Just turned and I didn't even say a word, walked straight away. Never, you're crazy, or something like that. And I was like, his name's Louis Budweiser. You put it together. I even talked to him about Louis Mark's toys once, and I was living on peanuts, barely alive, staying on couches because I could never get a decent job. I don't understand. It's absolutely insane. Obviously, Baton Rouge was threatened by they had to get rid of me before my cousins got there because they had to separate and divide and conquer because we would have been we could have been one of the most powerful families in the world potentially, at least in Louisiana or at least probably in the country. And because I was involved in a pyramid scheme, they were more worried about me contributing to the pyramid scheme than because they wanted to control they wanted to zoo, obviously, is my recollection. So that had to have been part of the reason why. I mean, there's no other reason other than, well, they wanted to prove to, and then there's my theory about they wanted to prove, because I didn't go to church. I had a bad taste in my mouth after St. Thomas More and Catholic High because the kids were fucking asshole snots. I really didn't like hardly any of the kids I went to school with. I mean, for the most part. And I don't know. And I paid a ton because I remember when I was in elementary school or junior high, I had this little blue cassette recorder that I could bring to class. And I had gotten AC/DC Black and Black. And I remember playing it on the bus. I'm sure I paid for that. And I think I had some Judas Priest back in the day. I was probably in junior high at the time or something like that. And I'm sure I paid, like I said, I paid for everything. And I was a bit of a rabble rouser. Well, I got, to a degree, I listened to the music, but I never put too much credibility. I liked the music, and I was a bit of a wild child, but I never put that much emphasis into it as far as programming certain degrees of it. And obviously other people, because I was a highly powerful entity, I was programming other people. So therefore, it just seems that nobody told me anything. I mean, it would be like letting a kid drive a Ferrari blind and I was driving around. I did a painting once it shows a guy with his hands behind his back and it's got a blindfold that's pulled up on his forehead. And that's how I was most of the time until at least the first time I got on a regimen of ADHD medicine and it kind of cleared the fog away for a while, a few months to where I could see. Once you learn to see, then it change your perspective. So that regimen that I took changed my perspective, not to mention I wasn't as easy to manipulate. So yeah, I was like a kid driving around a Ferrari and couldn't even see blind with not even having to use telepathy or telekinesis or whatever because I wasn't allowed to use my hands because your hands drive. If you're driving, if you're a giant to use your body, it takes money. And I've never been allowed because they sold my body for parts. They decided to chop me up and sell me for shares and parts. So I'm not allowed to use my body, theoretically, of course. So, goes back to my last Mardi Gras experience there. So I'm walking through the streets, and I vaguely remember, I think I had like a drink or something. And I have never been someone who could pick up a girl and go home with them, ever. I mean, in college, occasionally, maybe it would happen. And, but I mean, I'm shy. I was shy to a degree, but I mean, nobody, like I said before, I never had people talking to me or coming up. I was mostly, that's another reason I'm left alone. I operate a lot better when I have people around me but when I'm alone, I seem to be in my shell, and that's another, the mob has learned this, so they leave me alone because I kind of open up when I have reinforcement. So therefore, I'm left in solitary and poor. And I guarantee you it goes back to handicapping for some odd reason. So it's really bizarre, though, how this happened. That my last Mardi Gras experience, I think I hadn't showered in a week. I remember going to the R Bar, which is over on another end of Royal Street over on the non-touristy side near the Marigny, and I think I had a drink there, and then ended up driving all the way back out to the to my tents, which I had left out in the woods, and slept in my tent for another 7, 8, 9, 10 days or so. And I remember it was terrible because it would rain. A few nights it was just like torrential rain, and it got cold. And I was wearing as much clothes as I could. But I remember a few nights having to walk. I because it wasn't very far. I mean, people were. It was. There were people that would come in. There was a big pond in the front, which I never caught a fish. I tried fishing a lot, never once. Obviously, it had been fished out. And then there was a creek that was back in the woods a ways, and I caught a few fish in there. But I ended up pitching my tent so I wouldn't be stumbled upon early in the morning, like a mile back in there. And it was trails. It wasn't, there were trails and I'd left marks or directions. So, I mean, I figured after a few nights I had figured out how to find my tent. But yeah, there were a few times when I'd go to sleep, it would start just downpouring. So I had to walk like a mile all the way back to my car in the rain, carry in what I could because the tent was dripping and I was soaking wet. And it was kind of cold. We're talking about February in Mississippi, and or March. It was probably it was. I don't remember being terribly cold, so it had to be later than that. But so then I would ended up having to sleep in my car. And my cars were never in good condition because I could never afford upkeep. I mean, it was lucky if I could afford to get the oil changed every 5,000 miles. I mean, my entire life I never had any money ever. I mean, that's my poor is basically my entire life. Except there was one time when I was like a freshman in college. I had a job where I was driving trucks, and I used to work a lot. And I worked a lot because I was driving to Alabama and delivering supplies to these contractors from this cable company. And so I was driving these like rental trucks and dropping off a bunch of equipment. And I had a lot of money then, but I think I rubbed some people raw. See, Baton Rouge they wanted to use me as a way to show that they were the masters of the motherfucking state. So they were going to show the state, because we were obviously one of the biggest families, being because of the USS Kid, the kidnapster. They had figured ways around it. That's one of the reasons I was tortured for so long. And they're trying to alienate me from any muscle that I would have had. That's one of those things that because the USS Kid, a night in Casablanca, the Marx Brothers, here's looking at you, kid, Humphrey Bogart, and my grandfather, that sort of reminder, the Baton Rouge mob took offense to that, so they fucked me real bad. They figured out ways to screw me and screw my entire family. They're just, that's the way they are. I mean, they're charred. They never want it. They're daredevils. They're daredevil jackasses for the most part. So rather than, and it's just kind of screwy. So New Orleans, while I'm there, never met anybody of importance. Living in the Garden District, never met anybody of importance worth meeting. All that good wine down there, never met any of it or talked to. I mean, I would meet, talk to, but I mean, for the most part, I look like a clerk. But in reality, I could never escape this in order to try to develop any lasting connections to network, because I'm never allowed into competent situations of doing it. That's part of the method because of identity theft and body snatchers, in my estimation, because they sold my body for parts. So I ended up, oh yeah, like I said, back in the camping for Mardi Gras, there in the tent in a Mississippi state park, right near the Beau Rivage that was built by Steve Wynn, and then MGM ended up buying it. Um, yeah, so, and then finally, I think after 2 or 3 weeks in the woods eating tacos and hot dogs and whatever else I could, I ended up going back to my aunt and uncle's, taking a shower, and ended up driving out to my mother's. Usually that's what happened. After just falling on my face, my mother would end up, and I ended up staying. That's when oh, that's right. That's when I went to Dallas, and they had this high rise. It was called the Mayfair. It's a real nice apartment on like the 25th floor. The beautiful view of down, looked like the Ewing family there. But I'm not a part. I'm the oil. I'm not allowed to spend. I just supply the money. I can't use it. I didn't even know this at the time, but obviously other people were drilling into me. I was the South Park Estate being drilled into. So in the Mayfair condos, and ended up, I mean, what do you do when you have a few $100? And by this time, I had like $50, $100 or something like that. So ended up, she let me stay there. We're talking about, this was, I mean, a really nice apartment, condominium on like the 20th floor in Turtle Creek, in one of the nicest areas of Dallas. And I mean, like I said, all I've ever been able to afford to do is go to a coffee shop. I can't even really afford to go to any place decent because most of my life I've had never more than a few $100s. Um, and so and then after 2 weeks, I guess I looked for jobs online, or I looked around trying to find anything, but I mean, I don't exactly know. So they just said, we're going back to San Angelo to their palatial estate, and just said, well, you got to go. So I ended up walking down the stairs with them and going out. I ended up, I think they gave me a few $100. So I would, like, every third day end up getting a hotel room or something like that. And I think I called my dad and got him to wire me $100. I was eating $1 a day Jack in the Box hamburgers. But by the end, I was down to like $20, and ended up, no, that's right. I had like $70 left because I ended up, I mean, I didn't know what to do. Drove to West Texas, where I graduated high school. My Spuds McKenzie days there. So drove out there, got a hotel room, and then luckily I ended up getting a job. I actually went and got a job bartending at a local bar, and talked my mother into they had a guest house that was separate from their palatial estate, overlooking public courses where I had played JV golf as high school, and over the river. And finally talked him into letting me stay there. I kept that job a while, and then eventually ended up getting fired from that job. I got a tax return, and all I did in San Angelo was go to the coffee shop and go to the library. And that was it. And I drew a lot. I did a lot of drawing. I was studying, and I didn't have anything else. And that's where I went to. I met some people from Goodfellow Air Force Base. I had a few friends that I met. I ended up getting invited to a gay 4th of July party on the lake. And I had a few friends from work. We ended up going out, and I did a few things occasionally, and I would go out and occasionally do stuff. But for the most part, I was just sitting in the guest house alone. And of course, there's no jobs. And like I said, obviously I'm supposed to go out and hustle some deals. I don't even have a clue. I mean, I'm so far beat down that it's just, and I don't know anybody. It's just this, I don't understand this preoccupation of having to hustle a deal. When I didn't know this at the time. Actually, I had written this schematic years ago, putting a lot of these pieces together, figuring a lot of this out, that I was connected some way to this energy grid and to certain things. And unable to accomplish anything. So I ended up staying there a while, and finally my mom said, "You gotta leave." And then, well, no, I got a job. I couldn't find a job for like 4 or 5 months. I'm doing nothing except spending my tax return money for like I had $500 or $600 on just spending on food basically, and I was living next to a pool, so all I did was swim laps, go to the coffee shop. I couldn't do anything. I just didn't have any competent people around me. And this is part of the problem. What they were trying to teach me, what they wanted to prove is this whole Doctor Who dat mentality that they're so much more valuable because blood doesn't really matter at all. That's the whole mentality because and I appreciate the contribution, but when actuality well I'm providing energy to a lot of these degrees through different places that I was forced or coerced into attending. So right before I get kicked out, I'm dead broke again, out of any money. She's gonna throw me out into the street, and I get a job managing a steakhouse in St. Angelo. So I'm going in there working hourly for like 2 weeks, and I was trying to work as much as I could because even though I got the job, she said you got to get out. So I'm sleeping either in my car. Every once in a while, I would get a hotel to go, or I would. I remember staying really late. There was a TV and a couch in the place that I was working, and I would, after closing, all right, then I'd go sleep in my car until the next morning. Then I'd go to the coffee store. I'd go shave somewhere in a public bathroom, and then go to work. And I finally ended up after a few weeks making like $900 in check. $900 where I could stay in a hotel. Then I got fired from there. I mean, where else do you go? I mean, I had to go someplace where I kind of knew some people. I think I had like $500 or $600, so I went back to Baton Rouge and ended up this time I actually got a job. My father helped me get my apartment and everything, and it was right near the General Hospital where my stepfather previously had been vice president and where my grandmother had died, and I ended up getting a job. My car was already screwed up. So I ended up getting a job all the way across town out by Country Club, Louisiana, by Jimmy Swaggart's place, where called the French Market Bistro, where this is another point of interest, where Edwin Edwards had gotten a money drop from Eddie DeBartolo Jr., supposedly in the parking lot of the place that I was working, where he got indicted for racketeering or something like that. So I'm waiting tables there, and I remember Candy Edwards usually, and we were always taking candy from a baby. Didn't even know it. We were in a coma so deep that we were getting our pockets picked. So this is when my radiator had gotten a slight crack in it, and used to leak, and I used to have to add water to it all the time. But then it kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I've never been someone who knew much about cars at all or anything, so I'm unable to really do anything with it. And so, I mean, I probably should have done more what I could. I admit that I screwed. My car was in horrible shape, mostly because I never had any money, ever. I never had health care, and my car was always in terrible shape. The only time I ever had health care was when I worked at the Cadillac Grill. And yeah, that was it. Over the last many years or decade or so, I think I had that. And I had the option of health care, but I ended up putting it off because I was living in a hostel, and so I was trying to save up money to get an apartment in Aspen. So my car had a leak in it, so I'm living in this apartment. I live, and every time I go anywhere, I have to open up the hood, undo it, pour a gallon of water in it, shut it, and go. And it started steaming. It would get gradually worse. But I'm not dry. The only job I could get was all the way like 15 miles across town. So before I would drive out there, before I would drive back home, I'd have to open it up, pour a gallon of water in there so I could get back home. And it got worse and worse and worse and worse. So I was getting steamed like a crawfish, I guess. I have a feeling it had to do with red stick and the crawfish being red stick when they get boiled or steamed. So they wanted to show who the real crawfish really were. Because Edwin Edwards is from Marksville, and and of course, so I'm waiting tables at the place where he dropped the money while he was governor or something like that, and driving all and I I I didn't really make I don't know. It was just bizarre, and that's when I ended up getting arrested for DUI out in front of Gino's, and it just that kind of was when it started back to that thing, and I wasn't it was really bizarre because I don't know. It's just a bizarre conundrum of obviously being in a controlled environment, in a coma, and unable to think. But my car got worse and worse. It was so bad that I mean, I was probably being poisoned. I used to drive around with one of those painter's masks on because it looked like a train, a steam engine train. My car did. Well, in New Orleans, years before, when I was working as a fry cook, before I had moved, when I was right when the Hornets had moved to town. It was wet one day. It had just started raining, and you know how I say it gets real. It's the slipperiest just ever. So I'm driving the car one afternoon late to work, and I see a van in front of me stop, and I put on my brakes and I hydroplane because I never had good tires ever either. Tires I never had. My oil change was always in need. Never got a tune up. I could never get anything done on my car because I never had any money. I was always living paycheck to paycheck, a dollar here, a dollar there, that sort of thing. So I ended up sliding and sliding like a long way because it was so slick. And I just kind of bumped into this. It had one of those big trailer hitch balls on the back sticking way out of this van. And it knocked my front bumper off. Like the whole front bumper is this piece of metal and plastic on a Honda Prelude that I had. And I was late for work, so I threw it in the back, but ended up never getting it fixed. So I drove around for the longest time with like just this no front bumper on there. So it was just exposed sort of grill. And so I missed the point. Oh, so it kept getting worse and worse. The radiator started cracking. So I'm driving around with a painter's mask on around Baton Rouge. Now, you talk about handicapping from the skirts. Now, that's handicapping. You try to pick, they got to really scratch handicap you down there to keep me, or it wasn't just that. It was just a horrific nightmare of being any sort of thing. So, like I said, I was paying for anything that had gone wrong. Like once, when I was in elementary school, my mother made me wear a yellow polo shirt we always wore uniforms, but one day, for a day we got to wear regular clothes, she made me wear a yellow polo shirt. Sure, I paid for that. And then there were a few things. The Reister twins I paid a ton for. No doubt about it. Because they wanted, and then what were the other things? Oh, there were a few things. I don't know. So I ended up, like I said, it kept getting worse and worse to where it was just spewing out steam out of the front of this car, like a steam engine. And what else? Oh, so then I ended up, finally, it was overheating. It got worse and worse. And after I got I was saving up money to either try to buy another used car or get the whole thing fixed. It was going to cost like $400 or $500 or something like that. But I really wanted to get another car and sell this one. But I got a ticket to where, and then I got fired. So I got knocked down there. So I was trying to buy another car. I was looking for a used car or something. I don't know. It was either that or I don't know what I was going to do. But I was saving up. I've always been a really penny pincher because when you're living on $5,000 and $10,000 a year, you can't. So eventually, then I got a series of jobs, and finally, it got worse and worse to where I couldn't go like 5 miles without having to stop and pour a gallon of water. I used to have two gallon jugs of water behind my seat or in the trunk, to where anytime I went anywhere, I had to open up the hood, pour a gallon of water, close the radiator. And my hands got burnt really bad. I was wearing gloves, but I was in a hurry a lot of the time. So I got like acid burns on my hands, and I'm sure I got poisoned from the gas. That's kind of where I wore a painter's mask and ended up getting, it was just bizarre. It was horrifically experienced. And so then finally, I was working out at Riverbend, this restaurant owned by some people from, obviously these people in Baton Rouge didn't care who I was. They were going to screw me. And so I was working out there at Riverbend, of course, with this car that's just spewing gas and spewing steam into the air. And driving home one night, and my car locked up right next to the Hilton on I-10, and ended up having to walk the 3 or 4 or 5 miles home, and it got towed, and that was the last I saw of my car, because that was the last time I ever drove, was from one night leaving work from Riverbend. My car just blew up right near the Hilton on I-10, I-12 split. Actually, I think it was in the I-10, I-12 split right there in the median, and left it and walked home. And that was the last time I had a car. So, just some more fun facts of my lovely Louisiana Prince Charming life.